You know that one moment when everything seems to be going perfectly fine, and then, boom, something totally unexpected happens, and it leaves you standing there, unsure whether to laugh or just stare in disbelief. Well, that's exactly what happened the other day when my stepson, in the middle of his usual routine, somehow forgot his towel and, well, stepped out of the bathroom only partially covered. Now, before you jump to conclusions, let me set the scene for you. It wasn't exactly what you'd imagine. This wasn't some dramatic, life altering event. It was just one of those awkward, hilarious moments that ended up leaving us all a little bit red faced and scratching our heads. It started off like any other day. I was in the living room, scrolling through my phone, minding my business, when I heard the sound of running water from the bathroom. That's when my stepson, who's usually pretty on top of things, must have gotten distracted. Maybe it was the shower's steam or just the rush of getting ready for the day. But in the middle of his shower, he'd completely forgotten to grab a towel before stepping in. And when the time came to get out, he found himself in a bit of a predicament. Now, you might be wondering, how could someone forget such a crucial item? Well, it happens to the best of us, right? But here's the catch. He didn't realize until it was too late. He stepped out of the bathroom, dripping wet, his towel nowhere in sight, and in his rush, he barely managed to cover himself at all. The poor guy was standing there, his back half covered and the other half, well, not so much. To make matters worse, the bathroom door was wide open, and he was completely unaware that I was right outside, trying my best to act like I didn't just witness the most awkward scene unfold. The tension in the room was thick. What was I supposed to do? Should I pretend nothing happened, or should I step in and say something? I didn't want to embarrass him, but I also wasn't sure how to handle this awkward situation. I mean, it was kind of funny, but at the same time, I could see how mortifying it was for him. He didn't notice me at first, but I could see him glance at the mirror, then back at me as his eyes widened in realization. He froze. What happened next? Well, I can't give it all away just yet, but let's just say this wasn't the last of the drama that morning. There's more to the story, and things only got more complicated from there. You won't believe how it all turned out, so make sure to stick around for the next part, because trust me, it's gonna leave you laughing and cringing at the same time. Stay tuned. For a moment, time just seemed to freeze. My stepson stood there, wide-eyed, clutching onto whatever piece of fabric he had managed to grab in his panic. I could see the exact second it hit him. He wasn't fully covered, and I was right there. His face turned a shade of red I didn't even know was possible, and in that instant, he looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. I felt my own face heat up too, not because I was embarrassed for myself, but because I could only imagine what was running through his mind. Neither of us said a word. It was that kind of silence where both people are too stunned to react. He shuffled awkwardly, trying to adjust whatever he was holding, but it wasn't doing much to fix the situation. My instinct was to look away, to give him that tiny bit of dignity he was clinging to. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't just ignore what had just happened. Now, let me give you a little more context. My stepson is at that age where privacy is everything. He keeps his door shut, doesn't say much unless he absolutely has to, and would rather text than talk. So, for this to happen, absolute nightmare material for him. And the thing is, we've never really had an awkward moment like this before. Our relationship has always been built on mutual respect, a little bit of teasing here and there, but nothing this personal. This was uncharted territory, and I had no idea how to handle it without making things worse. I could tell he was trying to figure out his next move. Should he dart back into the bathroom? Act like nothing happened? Make a joke to diffuse the tension? I could practically see the battle going on in his head, And honestly, I wasn't sure how to help. The last thing I wanted was to make him feel uncomfortable in his own home, but at the same time, ignoring it completely might just make it even weirder. Then, to make matters worse, we heard the sound of footsteps. Someone else was coming down the hall. His head snapped in the direction of the noise, and his expression shifted from pure embarrassment to full-blown panic. If things were already bad, they were about to get a whole lot worse. And at that moment, I knew we were both in for an even more awkward situation than we'd ever expected. The footsteps grew louder. My stepson's eyes darted back to mine, full of silent pleading. He was already dealing with enough embarrassment. Having someone else walk in on this moment would be a complete disaster. Without thinking, he tried to shuffle back toward the bathroom, but in his rush, he nearly lost hold of the small piece of fabric keeping him covered. He fumbled, caught it just in time, but the sudden movement sent a tiny puddle of water splashing onto the hardwood floor. Great. Now there was actual evidence of this whole mess. I had to do something. If whoever was coming down the hall turned the corner now, they'd see him standing there, half covered, looking like he'd just been caught in the most awkward situation imaginable. I shifted, subtly trying to block the view, but there was only so much I could do. The hallway wasn't exactly wide, and unless he moved fast, this moment was about to become even worse. The tension in his face was undeniable. He knew he needed to get back into the bathroom, but he also didn't want to make any sudden movements that would draw even more attention to himself. The footsteps finally stopped, right outside the hallway. Whoever it was hadn't seen us yet, but they were close, too close. Then, to make things even more complicated, my stepson's phone, which he had left on the bathroom counter, suddenly buzzed. Loud. The noise echoed through the hall, and I saw his entire body stiffen. Whoever was outside the hallway heard it too. A voice called out, "Hey, is someone in there?" At that moment, I knew there was no way out of this without making things even more awkward. And the worst part? We still had no idea who was standing just around the corner. My stepson's breath hitched. His grip tightened on the fabric as he glanced between me and the hallway, his expression screaming pure panic. The voice from around the corner called out again, this time a little louder. "Hello, who's in there?" The tone wasn't angry, just confused. But that didn't make things any better. If anything, it made it worse. Because now, whoever it was wasn't just passing by. They were waiting for an answer. I could see the war happening in my stepson's head. If he said something, he'd draw even more attention to himself. But if he stayed silent, it would only make things weirder. Meanwhile, I was standing there, trying my best to look completely unbothered, like I hadn't just witnessed the most uncomfortable moment of his life. Then, before either of us could react, the footsteps started again, this time coming closer. My stepson's entire body tensed. He had seconds to decide what to do. Without thinking, I took a tiny step to the side, subtly motioning toward the bathroom. It was the only way out of this. He needed to move, now. Just as the shadow of the person in the hallway began to stretch onto the floor, he made his move. In one swift, awkward shuffle, he lunged for the bathroom, nearly slipping on the wet floor. The door swung shut just as the person turned the corner. I barely had time to process what just happened when I found myself face to face with the last person either of us wanted to see in that moment. Their eyes flickered toward the closed bathroom door, then back to me, eyebrows raised. What's going on?" they asked. And just like that, the situation had somehow gotten even worse. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing for an explanation that wouldn't make this whole situation even stranger. The person standing in front of me, my spouse, looked from me to the bathroom door, clearly trying to put the pieces together. I could tell they sensed something was off. The hesitation in their voice, the way their eyes narrowed just slightly, it was obvious. Why did he just run in there like that? They asked, tilting their head. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What was I supposed to say? There was no easy way to explain what had just happened without making it sound 10 times more awkward. My stepson was still behind that door, probably holding his breath, hoping this conversation wouldn't last long. But knowing my spouse, they weren't gonna drop it that easily. I started, scrambling for something, anything that would make sense. I think he forgot something in there. My spouse raised an eyebrow. He forgot something? Because it kinda looked like he was running for his life. I let out a nervous chuckle, trying to downplay it, but I knew I wasn't convincing. The longer this conversation went on, the more likely it was that my stepson would be forced to make an appearance. And considering how humiliated he already was, that was the last thing he needed. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, a loud thud came from inside the bathroom. We both turned toward the door. The sound was unmistakable. Something had just fallen hard. My spouse's expression shifted from suspicious to concerned. Is he okay in there? They asked, taking a step toward the door. Panic flashed through me. If they knocked or tried to open it, my stepson would have no choice but to respond. And judging by the sheer awkwardness of the situation, he probably wasn't ready to do that just yet. I needed to think fast. I'm sure he's fine, I said quickly, waving it off. Probably just knocked something over. But my spouse wasn't convinced. They knocked gently on the door. Hey, everything okay? Silence. Then, after what felt like forever, my stepson's voice came through, strained but trying to sound normal. Yeah. Just, give me a second. His tone wasn't exactly reassuring, and judging by the way my spouse was now eyeing me, they weren't buying it either. Something told me this situation was far from over. The silence stretched on for a few more seconds, thick with tension. My spouse wasn't moving away from the door, and I could see their curiosity growing. My stepson, trapped inside, was probably standing there, hoping time would just erase the last few minutes from existence. But there was no escaping it now. Something had to give. Then, just when I thought we might be able to move past it, the door handle rattled. My spouse was trying to open it. My heart nearly stopped. Wait, I blurted out, stepping forward, but it was too late. The door swung open just an inch before slamming shut again, this time from the inside. A muffled, panicked voice followed. I'm fine, really, just, don't come in. I closed my eyes for a second, bracing for what was coming next. My spouse turned back to me, arms crossed. Okay, what is going on? I sighed. There was no point in pretending anymore. Look, he just had a little accident, I said carefully. It's nothing serious, but let's just give him a minute. Their eyes narrowed. Accident? I nodded, hoping that would be enough. But before either of us could say another word, the bathroom door cracked open just slightly, and my stepson's voice came through, low and defeated. I slipped, he admitted. I'm okay, just need a towel. The second he said it, I felt the weight of the entire situation hit me all at once. The missing towel, the panicked hallway dash, the loud thud. It all made sense now. He must have been trying to dry off with something, lost his balance, and taken a fall. No wonder he'd been so desperate to avoid opening that door. I grabbed a clean towel from the nearby shelf and held it toward the small gap in the door. Here, I said, trying not to sound too amused. Take this before anything else goes wrong. A hand shot out, snatched it, and the door shut again instantly. My spouse, finally catching on, let out a short laugh, shaking their head. Well, that explains a lot. Just when we thought the situation had reached its peak, my stepson's voice came through once more, quieter this time. Also, I might have knocked over the shower rack. So, yeah. My spouse and I exchanged a look before bursting into laughter. This was definitely one morning we weren't going to forget anytime soon. The laughter eventually died down, but the amusement lingered. My spouse shook their head again, sighing. Well, at least he's okay, but I think this officially wins the award for most chaotic morning ever. I couldn't argue with that. The whole situation had started with one simple mistake, forgetting a towel, but had somehow spiraled into a full-blown comedy of errors. And yet, as awkward as it had been, I knew my stepson would eventually look back on this and laugh too. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. After a few minutes, the bathroom door finally creaked open. My stepson stepped out, fully wrapped in the towel this time, his face still a little red but mostly composed. He avoided eye contact as he muttered, "Can we just pretend this never happened?" My spouse smirked. "Oh, absolutely not." I grinned. "Don't worry, I won't bring it up. At least, not today." He groaned, running a hand through his damp hair. "Great. So, I'll be hearing about this for the rest of my life." I patted his shoulder. "Just for special occasions." Despite his obvious embarrassment, I could see the tension finally easing from his shoulders. The worst was over, and now it was just another family story to add to the collection. He shook his head, muttering something under his breath before heading toward his room, probably to hide until the memory of this morning wasn't so fresh. As he walked away, my spouse turned to me, smirking. "You know, I think this is the first time he's ever let us see him genuinely flustered." I nodded. "Yeah, I think it means he's starting to trust us more." And that was the real takeaway from all of this. It wasn't just about a forgotten towel or an awkward hallway encounter. It was about those little moments that, even when uncomfortable, brought us closer together. Later that day, when my stepson finally emerged from his room, he hesitated for a second before saying, "Thanks for, handling that." I smiled. "Anytime. Just maybe double check for a towel next time." He rolled his eyes but cracked a small, reluctant grin. "Noted." And with that, life moved on. The morning's chaos became just another funny memory, and while my stepson might never live it down, at least he knew we had his back, no matter how awkward things got.